What's up, Samuels, and welcome back to a very special tutorial, because today we're implementing an Angular application, a Trello board clone with Supabase. Supabase has been very kind to sponsor this video, and I've personally used Supabase for a lot of my side projects in the past, because Supabase is one of the, or maybe even the Firebase open source alternatives, because Supabase relies on all the open source tools. You can check out all the packages they're using, and they're using a SQL database instead of a NoSQL database. At this point recording, Supabase has pretty much all the same functionalities. We got a database, we got authentication with a bunch of providers, we got cloud storage, we got edge functions, we got real-time capabilities, and we're gonna embrace a lot of these things in our Angular Trello clone. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna build an application with magic link sign in, and then we will be able to add boards, add lists to those boards, add cards to those lists, and make all of this in collaboration with other users that we can invite to our boards, and finally see updates happening in real time. Because there's a lot of code involved, I highly recommend you also follow the tutorial and check out the source code so you can also copy in some snippets that we're using. Especially since we're using Tailwind, we're not gonna focus on the HTML a lot because this is pretty boring compared to all the other things that we do, like writing some cool SQL code that will create powerful tables and enable row level security. So there's really a lot in this. It's going beyond a simple example, so this is really more like a real world example that combines a bunch of different things, so you feel the pain in some situations, and we're gonna find solutions for those things together. Again, highly recommend you check out Supabase for your next project. Anyway, supabase.com, you can get started for free and create a cloud backend in pretty much seconds, so you don't need any backend skills. If you're not interested in writing your own backend, or you don't have the time or anything else, Supabase is a great alternative that you can easily plug into your Angular, React, Vue, Svelte, whatever kind of application. And now we're gonna see how we can build something truly amazing with Angular. Alright, let's begin our journey inside Supabase. So you can sign up to Supabase with your GitHub account for free and then create a new project in your dashboard. I'm gonna call my project Trello, and I'm gonna give it a password that is secure. You should make a note of that. I'm gonna start with a free pricing plan because, well, I don't need anything else. And then I'm gonna hit create new project. So setting up the project will take like, well, probably a 2-3 minutes. Because the database created, but we already get some information about the project that we can use, and I think we might already be able to change like the authentication, or are we able now? Well, we're probably not yet able, so let's wait until this is finished. Alright, we're finally able to dive into our tables, but before we do that, let's focus on authentication quickly. So we can easily plug in authentication into our Angular app. And we're gonna do this with a magic link sign-in because this is really like the easiest way. To do this, we will go through our authentication settings, and by default it is already enabled. We actually don't really need to change any of the redirect stuff, that should already work. But what I wanna change is I wanna disable the confirm email because that feels kind of strange for magic link sign up. So this is the only change we wanna make to the authentication provider. Now another fun begins, and that is setting up our SQL tables. So writing some SQL, you might have experience with SQL, you might not. Anyway, you're gonna learn a lot in this example. We're gonna have a few tables. So let me bring in the first part. In case you mess up anything, you can drop them again. We're gonna have 5 tables. We're gonna have a users table, which simply keeps track of the users that sign up to our application. We're gonna have boards, because this is like the first domain of our application. You can create a board, then you can create lists in a board, and then you can create cards in lists. And finally, we're gonna have a table that matches users to boards, so we can easily retrieve which user is part of a specific board for authentication rules. So, I would say we directly dive into this. I'm gonna bring in some snippets because, well, we can't do all the coding. I think we would do like 7-8 hours probably of doing this live. So we're gonna run through different code snippets today. I'm gonna make this even a bit bigger so you can see it better. Can we move this? Like the SQL editor is pretty cool usually. I can actually copy as markdown. Well, anyway. Well, what we could do as well at the same time is we could just create this in Visual Studio Code so you can take a better look at it. This is for the next part, but let me do a new file and call this db SQL. I'm gonna put this in. Oh, this looks a lot better. So we're gonna create a boards table, ID, creator references the authentication tables. This is an internal table of Supabase with a default name and a created. We got lists. All of this is pretty much the same. Only interesting thing here is that this one references a board, so we can put specific lists into a board. And I added on delete cascade, which means if we delete a board, the assigned list will also be deleted. And I think this makes really sense. Also added this to cards, because if either the list where a card was contained or the board was deleted, the card should be removed as well. Again, you can find all this code in the written article. We can easily copy this and also on the GitHub repository. Next thing, we got the user boards, which has the user ID and boards. Then we also got our easy user table. And then we can also do a little something right here in the beginning, which will be important for pretty much everything that we do that comes after this. And that is writing a function. So this function, or this definition of a function, it's called get boards for authenticated user. And guess what? It will give you the boards for an authenticated user. So it will select the board ID from user boards where user ID is equal to our current ID. And it means we are easily able with this functionality to check which boards a user is part of. And that's going to be interesting for our security rules. Also, I added 2 lines to alter the replica here. This simply helps to retrieve a full object from cards and lists if an object is deleted in real time. So this is just a little hack here. Well, not a hack, actually, it's just cool. So let's put this into the SQL editor. Let's run it, and cannot drop table users because other objects, well, in general, we don't really need to drop anything in the beginning. We just need to create them. So success, great success. After this, you can also check out your table editor, and you should see all the tables with the definitions that we made. So far, we can see that for all of them, row level security is not yet enabled, and that's what we're gonna tackle next, because we certainly wanna make sure that our data is secured, and we do this really on the backend side, which is in this case, Supabase. So now we're gonna add a few policies. And once again, let's take a preview look at this in my Visual Studio Code instance. You always begin this by altering a table, giving the name, for example, the boards table, and then enable row level security. Then we can come up with different policies. And by the way, just want to quickly tell you, if you want to do this, you could also go here and manually enable them or generate new policies in the UI. If you're if you don't really like to write the SQL for this, or just want some inspiration, there are great examples here how you could define different policies. Nonetheless, we're going to do it with SQL, and what we're going to do is we define policies for insert, for select, update, or delete. Oops. And some of them are now using our cool function that we added before. So for example, users can view their own boards. So you can only view boards if the ID of a specific board is in the array that we get back by this function, which is pretty handy. And we're going to see this in other cases as well. We do this for the user boards as well, where we enable row level security for lists as well. Again, here we are even using all, same for cards. So only users which actually have this board or are part of this board can usually edit something. So let's again put this into the editor here. Let's hit run, and then we get a success. I'm so terrified if we don't get a success in here. It's sometimes a bit hard to figure out what went wrong unless you wrote just bad SQL. So I'm really happy this worked. Okay, there's one more thing that we want to do in terms of SQL, and then we're done with the database setup, so bear with me. What we want to do now is add a trigger, or in fact 2 triggers. The first one will be handle board edit. This is going to be a trigger that runs when a board is added to boards. So user clicks, I want to add a new board. And what it does is after insert on boards, so after inserting a new record, I want to execute the procedure handle board edit. And this will then in fact insert into the user boards table, which is our kind of lookup table for the boards of a specific user, the board ID and the user ID. And later, when we get to the invitation of other users, we just need to create a new record in the user boards with user ID of the person we want to invite and the board ID. And then we can easily have other people participate in that board. And because our security rules also rely on this, everything just comes together and matches in the end, because that's what I prepared this tutorial for. Okay, this is the first one. The second one is an actually easy one that's often used with Supabase, and that is the create trigger on auth user created. So when a user is created, registered, or this automatically now happens with our magic link sign in, I want to run the procedure handle new user, which will simply add the new user data into our table. The reason is simple. We don't have access to the internal auth users table of Supabase, and sometimes you need the user ID, email, anything. And therefore we have this own users table. So let's grab this and put it into this and run it. And yes, nice. We came through all the SQL code without issues. That's great. You can also see that row level security is enabled for all of our tables, and we can see all the cool rules that we implemented. Okay, this is a big step forward. We're pretty much done with the configuration of our Trello project in Supabase. We're certainly going to come back to this at a later point of time, but for now we can focus on the Angular project. So I actually created a project already by running ng new Trello board. I want to have a routing file, and I'm going to use SCSS because I just like it a bit more. Then I also generated 3 components: a login, which is going to be our login page, an inside area somewhat with a workspace, which just shows the boards, and then the actual board page where all the other magic happens. We also need 2 services. We could probably do it in one, but I like to separate the authentication logic from the data logic. And finally, of course, we need the Supabase JS package so we can actually easily interact with Supabase. On top of that, maybe 2 additional packages, a little spinner and a gravatar. Well, this is kind of optional, but I kind of like those. So we can have a user avatar and a little loading spinner. Yeah, you can install them if you want to and follow my example, or don't if you don't like those packages. Anyway, let's get ahead in our app module and add the gravatar module as well as the ngx spinner module, because we installed them and we need to use both of them in our imports. So let's add, of course, the gravatar module, the ngx spinner module. As far as I know, we will also need the browser animations. Yeah, that import never works. The browser animations module. There we go. And I think we might also need, no, actually I think this should be pretty much fine. App routing, we got everything. Cool. Meanwhile, we can already run ng-serve-o, which will open up the preview of our application. Is already taken. Oh, why is this already taken? Probably because I ran this before. So no, I don't want to take this. So let me quickly fix this. ng-serve-o, and it should work now. Also, a little change that we need to apply to our styles. Actually, not to the styles here, but to the styles of our Angular JSON, is to include something for the ngx spinner. So this is the default Angular. Cool. But what we want to do is here inside the Angular JSON, append an entry, not for the browser animations module, but instead for the ngx spinner and the animation you want to use. I don't know why this is still required. Usually stuff like this works, but at least at the time recording this, it was required. Now, let's go ahead, because we see this is the default and we want to use our own routing. So therefore, let's move on to the app routing file and change it to include the different routes. what we're going to set this to is, for the blank path, we're going to show the login component. For workspace, we're going to show the workspace, and then we got a wildcard with an ID so we can later load information about something specific. Now, once we hit save, nothing really changes. We only see login works here because Angular by default defines everything inside this app component. And what we want to do is we want to actually remove everything and only leave this one little line in here. So then the router will only render what's being resolved by the app routing module. Now, to also set up our connection to Supabase, we can go into our environment file and we need to add two little keys. We need our URL and an anonymous key. And you can grab them from the settings page of your project. I think we need to go to API, right? There's the URL, copy this and put it in here. And then the anonymous key, copy it and put it into the key. There we go. Since we're going to use this in production as well, you can also copy it here, but you could also have a different environment for production that would of course work as well. By the way, quick information about this key. It is already stated here, this key is safe to use in a browser if you have enabled row-level security for your tables and configured policies. Because this only allows anonymous access to your database, and if you came up with the right policies, nobody with this key should have real access to your database, unless there's some kind of public information. Only this secret can bypass our row-level security, so this shouldn't be in your project, because everything you have in your Angular project, even if this is called environment, it's not going to be private. It's not like a .env file on a server. It's different. So we got this, we got that. There's only one more configurational thing that we want to do, and that is integrating Tailwind, because I'm a big fan of Tailwind. I don't know about you, some people like it, some people don't. This is certainly not a requirement for working with Supabase and Angular, but I found that it's making building websites a lot easier. So you can install it like I did with npm install, Tailwind CSS, Post CSS, Auto Prefixer, and Tailwind Forms. And then you can go ahead with npx Tailwind CSS init, which will simply generate a Tailwind configuration file in your project. And the only thing we need to change in here is we're going to add content and we're going to add a Tailwind plugin in here. So that's what we installed before as well. Now, to finally use Tailwind, did I actually close my preview in here? Why? I didn't really have to. Like, this was totally unnecessary. But what we want to do is we want to include the styling for Tailwind. So add Tailwind base, components, utilities, all of this in our SCSS. Now we should be able to, we see our preview again. Let's check if we're able to use Tailwind. So let's go to the login page and say h1 class, I don't know, text underline. Is there something? Or like, let's just style it with a color, text red, hello, Tailwind. And then close it and let's check. Yeah, looks like we got the Tailwind colors, looks like we got Tailwind styling. So we're ready, the base of our application is done. I always like to have this state because we can now do pretty much everything that we want in terms of other functionality, but with the connection to our backend, we have the styling in place, we have a bit of routing in place, and now we can really dive into our first real functionality. The cool thing about Magic Link Sign-In is that we actually don't need to do a lot. We just need one input field for an email and we need to send this to Supabase. So let's begin by setting up our authentication service and first of all creating a connection to Supabase using Supabase client and then calling create client in our constructor. This can be done by using the information from our environment. So let's call create client, and then we need to pass in the Supabase URL and the key. So let's do this. Supabase URL was the first thing, and then the second one should be our key. There we go. This creates our connection, and we're going to use this object for all further work and calls to the API. At this point, I also want to add a little listener so we can see what's going on in the background, because otherwise we don't really notice what's happening. So let's add something to the auth in here, and we're going to add the onAuth state change function. So this will give us back an event and a session, or eventually, and then we can handle this. So we could probably do something like if event is equal to signed in. There are different events because of TypeScript. We even get nice code completion in here. I really like this. So if we're signed in, we can do something. In the else case, well, we could probably do something else. Also, let's add a lock in here for the actual event as well as the session, because that's going to be interesting. Now, besides that, we just need one function for now, and we're going to call this sign in with email. The only thing we need to pass is, of course, an email. And what we now call is, oh, this looks interesting. We should probably call this return, not routen. This.Supabase Authentication sign in. In future version or in the next version, which should be hopefully released pretty soon, this might be called sign in with OTP. So be aware of a few changes. I'm gonna leave a comment or tell you about this if I know that it's coming up. Otherwise, the API sometimes changes, and you can check out the Supabase documentation in case you encounter any other problem. Now let's also directly add not the login component, but the logout, and call this.Supabase. Is it sign out or logout? I'm always confused. Sometimes it's sign out in packages, sometimes it's logout. Well, we're gonna do it like this. Actually, we could also, we want to probably keep track of our user. And I've been using a construct for quite some time now that looks like this. So you can use either current user with underscore or not underscore. It doesn't really matter too much. But more important is the behavior subject. So a behavior subject has an initial value, and I've set this to null. But later it could be a Boolean or a user or just any. The reason is, if the application loads, we don't know exactly about the state of user. Could be signed in before, could not. We just don't know it. And this takes time to load. And we're gonna later add a guard to protect our pages. And if the guard sees the value of the behavior subject is null, it simply doesn't mean anything to the guard. So what we really want is we wanna either have a true false or a user here. And we're gonna get this information from either the onAuth state change event or by manually grabbing that information. So let's add another line, or actually 2, 3, 4, 5 lines to check the user right in the beginning. Because I noticed that the onAuth state change event is not always called by the SDK when the page loads. So this is like a little fallback. And quick note, this is gonna be called getUser in the future, in the next version, and it's gonna be a promise. So you're gonna have to add a then block here. Anyway, in our case, we're just gonna add user in here and log out the user. And if we get a user, we will emit this to our behavior subject. Otherwise, we're gonna set it to false, because at this point, we certainly know that there is no user. And that means false really means no access, not authenticated. And we can do pretty much the same now in our signed in event. So if we're signed in, we're gonna use session.user to set that value. And in the other case, we're gonna set it to false. So there we go. Also in the not signed in case, what we could do as well is we could inject the Angular router here. And then when we do this, we just navigate back to our login URL, so which is / in our case. Now, one more thing for this service before we're finished. This is now a private value. Because a behavior subject can be changed, you can emit new values. And you don't want to do this from outside of the service. The only way to get this value is now implementing a little getter function. And because I called this one underscore current user, we can now do an actual really getter function like this and return this dot current user as observable. Because an observable can't be changed from the outside, we can only subscribe to this and get the changes. All right, let's move on to the login page. And on that login page, we're gonna capture an email and display a little notification that you should check your emails. You could also use like an alert package for that probably. But I'm just gonna call this link success, and it's gonna be false in the beginning, really keeping it easy. Then we need a few imports. We of course need our authentication service, but we also need the NGX spinner service that we installed before and the Angular router. And then we can create a little function for our sign-in, which is quite easy because we've done all the hard work in the service. And now the only thing we need to do is show our spinner, call our authentication service with sign in with email and pass the email, and then check the result from this. I'm actually gonna add a little lock here, and then we're gonna hide the spinner. And if we don't encounter any error, we set our link success to true, and otherwise we're gonna display a little alert. Now we could actually call this, let's maybe do this for fun. Do we want to do this like having a little button with a click event, or do we want to implement it correctly? Let's do this. Yeah, I should probably, because I don't have any email, I'm just gonna set this to my own email right now, or a testing email. So it looks like this. And now let's see, where's the instance? Is it actually running? Hello, my friend. Yeah, looks good. There we go. Okay, failed to load. Yeah, we don't have a token. Well, actually we can refresh and then we see we have no user. That's cool, that's cool. Let's try to log in and we get back something. We actually don't see a loading spinner yet, but that's intentional because we haven't added it to our the markup of our page. But anyway, I already got an email, confirm your sign up, which is actually not correct. Didn't we disable this? I thought we had disabled this. Oh, I probably didn't press save, right? Yeah, I wanted to disable this. Sorry about this, but nice. So I can now also go ahead and delete this user. I wonder if this already created a connection in our users table. Yeah, it did. So I'm gonna get rid of this as well, just in case I mess up something. So now, anyway, we've seen that Magic Link sign up already worked with just one line of code, which is pretty cool. For the UI, I'm gonna bring it in because with Tailwind, it's gonna be like we're gonna take hours to write this. And you can find the code for this in the according tutorial. It's anyway not that hard beside all the Tailwind stuff. So what it is a flex layout. We have a block for our Trello up here. Can we maybe do this side by side so you get a better view of this? Can't bind to ng models and is now a property. Okay, that means we haven't added the forms module. Interesting. We're lacking some basics here, right? Okay, let's do this side by side. That looks a lot better. That looks better to me. So we got our sign up here. I can now call the send magic link, which will send a magic link to my email, which shows the spinner component, and we see this. So let's give a quick look at this. So if we have no link success, we're gonna display this sign up. And if we have success, else check mails, we're using this template here. Really nothing fancy in here, nothing really to worry about, just a lot of HTML and Tailwind. However, what we see is that I got an email and I can follow this link, and I'm gonna definitely do this. So now we've seen there was a little excess refresh token in our URL. And what we also see if we open the logs at this point is that we have an event. We have the event signed in, and we have a session object with all this information. And this is now also stored. So I think at least I should be able to refresh this. And exactly now we're even getting a log from our authentication service about the user. And again, the sign-in event and the session. Again, for me, this wasn't called all the time, so that's why I'm doing this manual retrieving of user object in the beginning, and it shouldn't be a problem. But what we also probably want to do in this case is we want to move to the inside area. So let's add one more thing to our login page. Let's go back to the login. Let's give this enough space. I'm gonna get rid of the log. And what I'm gonna do is in the constructor, I'm gonna subscribe to the current user object from our authentication service. Because again, this is an observable. So this will give us back a user. And then I'm gonna check if we have a user. I'm actually gonna route the user forward to the workspace area because there's no point in staying on the login area if we already know that a user is authenticated. So that we don't need anything else. This line is enough to automatically send the user there. We could do this in the service as well. The problem is that we might actually access a different internal page and then we're automatically routing the user to the workspace, which might not be the destination the user wanted to go to. So let's better keep this on the login page, which will automatically route the user forward. Login component, something was expected. I didn't close this correctly, right? There we go. But now it automatically brings me to the workspace. Now, there are two problems. Number one being that I don't have a logout, but we can do this. And number two, that this page is actually not protected. So let's try and add a quick logout functionality to our workspace page. So the only thing I really want to do in here is I'm gonna add a function sign out, and we're gonna inject the private auth package here, auth service. There we go. And then we're gonna just manually call this button click sign out, really not using any styling at all. I just want to have the functionality of a sign out because this removes our session. We see event signed out, no more session, and we're brought back to this page. However, this is only like half of the stuff we need to do because now I'm not authenticated, I'm on the login, but I'm still able to access my workspace page. So, ta-da, I'm in the inside area. This is not super critical because all of our real security happens on the backend side with the role level security, but of course we don't really want to happen this to happen in our front-end application. So what we can do to protect that page is adding a guard with Angular. That's pretty easy. We go ahead and generate a guard, add guards authentication, and we want to implement the can activate interface. And now let's go into that guard, or probably even before, we're going to add it to our app routing file. So we want to protect our inside pages. Sometimes you could also have a parent path. Since we just have two paths, I'm just going to add it manually. Auth guard here and auth guard there. And ta-da, the inside area is protected. Well, it's not really protected because by default that guard returns true. So what we need to do now is come up with a logic that prevents access to a page if a user is not authenticated and allow it when it is authenticated. In fact, we actually got everything in place already because of the service, the authentication service that we created before and the observable that we got. So we're now gonna subscribe to this and we're gonna filter out some values and map around some other stuff. And first of all, we get rid of all the things that we don't need in here. So we can get rid of this, and we can also, of course, add a constructor to our guard in which we inject our authentication service. Also, we might need, do we need access to the router? Yeah, I think we probably need access to the Angular router in here as well. And we should spell this correctly to make it work. Now, what we want to return here is the observable of our authentication package or our authentication service, and we're gonna pipe the result. Because the problem is, let's just add a map block and say, okay, I get a value is authenticated in here. And based on that value, we're gonna either allow access or not. For now, I'm just gonna return true all the time. But what I wanna do is I wanna log is authenticated in here, and then we're gonna see a little issue. So the problem is that right now I'm not authenticated, and is authenticated returns false. Well, that's actually that is not a problem. That's pretty good. But I've seen other cases, like I've seen the future. Now I've seen other cases where we get the initial value of the behavior subject. And we're gonna see this as well. And the initial value is null, and we don't really want that value. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a filter in here and say the value null will be filtered out. So now there's one more thing that we need to include, and that is a take one block, because it's an observable and sometimes this doesn't complete because we don't immediately have the value or something, and this can be a problem. So filter take map, this is our setup, and then it becomes quite easy, because if we're authenticated, we can actually allow access like we did in here, return true. And if we're not authenticated, we're gonna route the user to our landing page by creating a URL tree which matches the signature of the function. So now we already see I'm immediately brought back because I'm not authenticated. Again, user null is authenticated false. I'm on the login. And now I can do the dance again in the other way and actually get a magic link, follow that magic link, and voila, we're signed back in. And now I'm also able to refresh this page, and we see I'm allowed to access that page. Great success. Now we can move into the next thing, which is implementing the workspace logic and creating actual boards. So far we only covered the basic setup of our Supabase project and the authentication. We're now completely done with all things related to authentication. But what we now need is a service. Do we have that service? Yeah, the data service. That's what we want to focus on next. And we want to focus on, first of all, on setting up the basics again. This is, again, what we already had before, creating a connection using our environment. And then we're going to add two functionalities which are now actually using Supabase to insert data, because what we want to do is, of course, we want to read our data, but to read the data we should probably have some data. So therefore let's start with a function start board, which will add a new board. And what we're going to return is this Supabase from, and now we need a table name, and I highly recommend that we put all table names into const values up here, because then we can easily use this and we're not making any typo. Yes, you're pretty good, but typos can happen. So keep those names in a variable and better make it a const. So from that table, it sounds a bit strange, from that table, but that's just how it works. We want to call insert. And the funny thing is we can actually insert nothing because when we do this, our SQL will take over. We don't have the SQL here anymore, right? Let me quickly check if I can bring it back up, because we defined for the user boards a default value, and therefore, or actually for a boards table. So this was a boards table, and it has a default timestamp. The creator is our ID, and the title is by default untitled board. So there's actually nothing we need to do. And remember, when we insert something in that table, automatically we will create an entry in the user boards table. So that is the whole idea here. So let's move now to our workspace component as well. And on the workspace component, we can also add a function, async start board, which will pretty much just call our data service. So we just need to inject the data service, private data service, and then within start board, we're gonna call await, because this returns a promise, this data service get boards. Didn't I hit save or anything, or did I? Oh yeah, actually this is start board, not get boards. But on init, we definitely also want to have a function to get boards. This is certainly true. So let's add a new function, get boards, as well to our data service. Do we want to implement get boards as well right now? What do you say? It's a pity that you can't answer. I think we're going to implement it real quickly, because it's going to be mostly like this, just a tiny bit different. For simplicity, let's add the boards to a variable first. So from our table, we don't want to insert, but we want to select the data, and we can get started by selecting everything. But actually, I don't want to use it from the boards table. I want to have it from the user boards table, because that's really the table with our information. And then we're going to return either boards.data. Oh, we should probably await it in this line. That makes more sense. Otherwise, it's going to really look horrible. Or if this is not defined, we're going to return an empty array. Stuff like this just makes life easier for the actual component. And we're going to talk about how to populate that in a second. For now, we can just add this to our app here. Also, what I want to add to our workspace file here is two variables, boards, where we keep track of the boards, and the user, so we can display a little user avatar in a second. And within our oninit, we can now actually load the boards. I'm gonna put a log in here so we know what's going on. Actually, this log is usually way too long for me. So I'm gonna do it like this. Okay, we got most of the stuff in place in here. So let's keep it like it is. And again, for the view, it's gonna be very complicated since we got a lot of Tailwind stuff. Let's just do this. For the header, I came up with a little header bar. Can we see this? Which now looks like this. Actually, a nice green. We got our login button, and we also got the ngx gravatar based on our user email. So that was pretty easy to implement since we already got access to the user. We can just pass that email to the ngx gravatar package. Oh. It's really important to drink a bit of coffee in between. Otherwise, the tutorial won't work. Sorry, I have to inform you. Now, for the main area, what we want to do is we want to have a list where we iterate all the boards. For every board, we're going to show the title, and we're going to use the ID for the router link. I'm going to get into why it looks like this in a second. For now, just see that we got pretty much nothing else and a start board. Maybe we can do this again side by side, so it's going to be a bit more interesting. So let's try and hit a new board, and we see a log. We see an error. New row violates row level security policy for table boards. And this is interesting. This is an interesting problem because you might think we've set up everything in a cool way, but we haven't. That's a problem. The reason here is simple. If we go into our Supabase account and into the application, which for some reason isn't open anymore, and check out the boards table, we're gonna see the security rules. No, this little, actually not edit, but the security rules. And we're gonna see for boards we can insert. Yeah, that's not a problem. But the problem is that by default it was selecting the board, and selecting the board is only allowed if a board is in our user boards table. And remember, this is only added, this entry, after something is added in the boards table. So we got a little problem. Pretty much we're creating an entry in the boards table, like we create boards. Then our code already tries to select the new board. But after this, we add to user boards by trigger, and only now we're allowed to select. Now we can select board. So that's why this here fails right now. And therefore, we need to, first of all, prevent selecting that entry and then finding a way to reload our data. And preventing that access is actually pretty easy. In previous versions, we could pass in returning minimal. In the future, this will actually be the default. And then if you do want to select it immediately after an insert, you need to have a select after it. So that's a tiny difference. So with this in place, we shouldn't encounter any problem anymore. And by the way, we should actually now get a log from this .boards. Okay, yeah, we didn't add this. So let's hit new board. And from our log, do we actually get any log? Did I add a log? Yeah, there's the log. No problem, no data. That's cool, because if I hit refresh now on this page, we're gonna see this .boards looks like this. But that means cool, we can select our own user boards. Bad, the information is horrible because, well, we have a board ID, but we should certainly resolve that board ID to the actual board. And we can do this in our select statement now. So not selecting star, but instead we're gonna query the boards table using board ID. And we wanna have like, yeah, we can also have like everything. That should work. So let's check. And as a result, we get back this. Now boards is populated with the actual information of the new board. I hope I'm not covering this with my head, so I'm gonna move it here. But it's now also under the boards key, simply because this is how it works. And that's the whole reason we had this strange setup in the workspace component of board, which is the item of the iteration, and then boards.id and boards.title. So this is simply because we got another key boards in here and need to drill down one level further. But we can now have a second board, but at this point it's not updating our UI at the same time. So let's also retrieve the information after starting a board. So what we can do is we can do pretty much the same again. It should actually immediately work on the next line. So we're just adding it and then we're grabbing the information. And what we can do in this case as well is add a little snippet to directly route into that board. So let's add the router as well. And then we're gonna do something. So if our board's length is bigger than 0, which means we have a board, we're gonna pop the last board because that's the one that we just added, and check again the key boards of that new board, and then route the user forwards to workspace and the ID of that new board. And that gives us a nice automatic routing effect. So I can now click new board and I'm on workspace 4. And if we check this out, my other boards, this is workspace 2, this is workspace 3, this is workspace 4. So those are the IDs of our boards, which means we have successfully finished the first page, or the first real page of our application. Once again, cool Tailwind UI Flex layout works pretty nicely, and we've managed the crisis of automatically selecting something and running into issues with our row level security. Now, from now on, it gets probably a bit more challenging, so maybe we should take another sip of coffee. I think now I'm ready. Because now we dive into the actual workspace. And here we need to manage lists, we need to manage cards, we want to invite users, we want to update the board. So a lot of functionality. And in preparation of that functionality, let's add a bunch of CRUD functionalities to our data service, because I really don't want to do them one by one, and we're going to go through this up front. Let's start. First of all, 3 functions for board to get the board information of one specific board, and all of these follow pretty much the same pattern. From our table, select something. Sometimes we have a match clause, which means we want to match this specific document with this board ID. And if we know we just want one result, we can also say single in the end. If we want to update a board, from table, update information, and also the match clause. And same for delete, this time only switching update for a delete statement. That's all we need in terms of board. Now, inside a board, we can have as many lists as we want, and those lists contain cards. So let's begin by defining the functionalities for those lists. First of all, we want to have the lists for a specific board. That means we're gonna grab from the list table where our board ID is equal to the board ID here. Actually, I could also use match. Find our rows. What's the difference between match and equal? I guess we can adjust different powers in those. I think equal should actually be fine. We can also order the result if we want to, but that's kind of optional. We will not really get into the positioning and drag and drop today. But you could add this. So I prepared this example. So you can later, after we're done, add some cool more functionalities. Okay, if we want to add a new list, well, we're going to insert a new list to the list table with some information, and then we're going to select the new list. Once again, this is actually the default in the current way, but in the future, you would have to add exactly this if you immediately want to select something. Update, delete, exactly the same as before. Now, on to cards. For cards, we also need some functions. Let's bring them in. We need to add a card to a list. Everything of this just follows the same pattern. It's just drilling down more levels. Like now we also got the board ID and we got a list ID that we're gonna keep track of. We're gonna get all the cards for one list using the same logic. And then of course we can update and delete a card. Okay, this was pretty boring because most of this is the same, but it's gonna give us a nice base for our actual view because we got all the functions that really matter in here, all the database interaction, and we can focus on creating the actual page. However, there's one more thing that I wanna add here, and that is inviting user to a board. Now, you could come up with some kind of sophisticated logic for this, but eventually we're gonna go pretty easy on this today. There should probably be a dot in this case. Okay. So the problem is that if you really want to implement something like, okay, a user can accept the invitation, then you have to create a new table and another view where you present those invitations. So we're gonna skip this and move right to the end. And what we're gonna do is to add a user to a board. We, of course, are on a board, so we got the ID, and we're gonna add an email of the new user. We then look up in our users table that is populated whenever a user signs up to the application, if we got that record, and we're gonna select the ID of that user. And if we got that information, we're gonna use the user ID of that user to create another entry in our user boards relation table for user ID and board ID, and boom, the new user has immediate access to our board if he wants or if he doesn't want, or she. So this is like taking a shortcut, but you could easily make this an invitation-based thing. You could have an invitation table, then you add an invitation. You probably also send out a transactional email with a trigger or something. You could really get fancy with inviting users to a board, but in the end, this is all it takes to make it work in our case. So with all of this in place, we're able to pretty much close. Yeah, I think we can close the workspace and focus 100% on our board component. And there's a lot going on this page. And I'm gonna bring in different snippets because typing all of this is likely gonna take us very, very long. So let's begin with the board component, and quick note, if you just skip to this chapter, you can find the code in the GitHub repository or the article. Okay, let's begin. We need some information. We always need some information, and we of course need some imports. What we want to do is right in the beginning, grab the ID of a board from the URL. Actually, we don't need this one right here. The real-time service won't be used in this case. We're gonna handle this in a different, also pretty cool way. So we need the activated route and our data service and the router. Yeah. Then we got, of course, we got a bunch of lists. We got our global board ID. We got a title that we might want to edit, a card that we might want to edit, some board information, and just some properties that we need in our view. But more importantly is at this point in the beginning to retrieve our information. So maybe we can, well, I think you can pretty much trust me that we're at this point getting our board ID. So if we get the board ID, I think we're gonna do this in the ng on init. I feel better about doing it in the ng on init. Okay, let's do it in here. Don't want to do this. So there we go. Okay, so we got the board ID, and we can then load the board and set this.board info, which is like the general information about a board, to await this.data service get board info based on our ID. And we're gonna lock this out. There we go. And we should be able to see there is the data. So we should probably set it to this snippet here, .data instead. Created, creator, ID, title. That's cool. That's exactly the information we wanted to have. Now we want to set our lists, and we're going to set them to await this.data service get board list. And you see, because we've set this up in a genius way before, we can now easily use the functionalities in here. We should probably don't use this twice in the line. That doesn't really make any sense. But now that we get access to the list, we can also get all the list cards. And this is a bit more challenging, but nonetheless, it's pretty straightforward. We iterate all the lists, and for every list ID, we're gonna add an entry to our list cards object. So we, in the end, got something like, let's make this look good, ID 1, and then we got an array of cards. 1 card, 2 card. And then for list number 42, we also got an array of card. This is how it looks like in the end. Okay. On top of that, in the end, we might want to handle some real-time updates. So I'm already adding this now because I'm pretty sure I'm going to forget about this. And then I wonder why our real-time updates are not working. So let's add this, handle real-time updates, and also it's a little spoiler towards the end that we're gonna do something cool. Now, before we create the view, which is again quite complex, let's add a few more functionalities, which we need, which are kind of based on the our service. So in terms of the board logic, what we need is a way to save the board title, which will just call our service and then change or flip over a title changed. We got a few of those variables of booleans which switch a state, and you're gonna see in the UI in a second how this plays together. Also, we got delete board. Well, this deletes our board and of course routes us back, because if we delete it, well, there's no more board. Then we got some logic related to the lists. Of course, we can add a list using our service. And we're at this point not adding it to our local array of lists. So this means for now, we don't really see any updates until we refresh the page. But we're gonna handle this by listening to database changes in real time in the end. Then we got a little helper function to edit the title of a list. Maybe you could have omitted this because it's adding complexity here. But I want to give you a nice example of everything, pretty much everything. So editing title, updating title, and deleting a board list. All of this is related to lists. Now we finally have some logic for cards as well. So let's put this in here, the cards logic. Again, we can add a card, we can edit a card, we can update a card, and we can delete a card. This is kind of the same as lists now. It's just another level drilling down. And there's one last thing which we need to connect to our service, and that is the invitation logic, but that's pretty easy. We just have this property add user email, which we will connect to an input field, and then we will send it to our server, and the service is gonna take care of the rest. Now, in terms of the view, now it gets really interesting, but first of all, once again, the header. The header area will now look like this. So we got the title up here, we got a function delete board, and we can go back, which means I'm now already able to navigate around. Also in the center, which looks like a title, it's actually an input if we click on it. So let's give this a try. Change name, and then a save appeared, and I'm able to save this. And now we see change name, and this is like probably my to-dos. Gonna hit save, and we see this really starts to feel a lot more like the end result that we wanted to see. So we're able to change stuff, and we did it in a cool way. Because again, where is it? Yeah, it's just an input field with a bit of styling. But once we click into it, the title change becomes true. And then we can save the board title because this button becomes available. Little nice logic that we added in here. I can also delete that board. I don't want to do this right now, probably for the untitled board because I don't really need this. So let's try it here. And then that board is gone as well. So that is working pretty nicely. One thing I noticed is that right now with my logic, I have no way to cancel this actually. So what I did is I added a little cool Angular snippet, which is a host listener. So we can add the host listener from Angular core and listen to key down events. And if the key code is 27, I don't know whether this is deprecated. Key code is deprecated. It still works. Let's hope it works for a few versions at least. We can set our title change false and also end editing for every list or card that we currently have open. And when we do this, I can change this. I can click escape, and then it kind of ends editing. I could probably even blur the input field, but well, let's call this now shopping list and hit save, and then we're good here. Fine, cool. Okay, now I'm really sorry because the next snippet is nested in a lot of ways. We got lists and we got cards in those lists, and we want to have everything inside one page. It didn't really make any sense to split up the code simply because, well, then I have to say, okay, add some code snippet here and some code snippet here. So instead, let's just get through this. We got a main area with a nice little flex layout. We iterate all the lists. This is pretty much the outside iteration, and after that, we got a button to add a list. Inside of this, where we iterate all the lists, we got another logic to edit the list, just like we had in the top bar, which is pretty much this first area. Then we need to iterate all the cards of a list. So we have another ng4 of all the specific lists. And again, we can of course edit those cards. Then we have an input field and a button to update them or a button to delete them. And then somewhere in between, we also have a button to add a card or delete a list, just like this. Again, all of this makes more sense if you check it out locally and take a look at it in your own IDE. But what we see right now is that we only got a button to add a list because right now we don't have a list. So let's click new list. This again won't create anything since we haven't added any real-time stuff. But if we hit refresh, we see that we actually have a new list, and I can do it again and I should have two lists. Fine, I can update this. Update it, let's say this is supermarket. And I can click save. I'm gonna call this one, I don't know, what's it, pharmacy or something. Is this a word or is this Spanish? I don't know. Okay, let's add a card. Again, cards won't appear, but I'm gonna click it anyway. And then we got milk, and we also got chocolate. Don't eat too much chocolate. Eat more protein, that's better for you. And then, I don't know, some kind of pills. And maybe we're gonna delete this one. Okay, and with that in place, we see I can refresh this and I got all the information nicely aligned. Now it's also a good time to take a look at your Supabase database again, because you're gonna see all of the entries that we added here in the editor. So you could now play around with the values, change the values in here, do whatever you fancy with those entries, because the editor from Supabase for the tables here is actually pretty nice. I enjoyed this really. You can even go into editing the actual table, which we'll also have to do in a second, to edit the columns and add columns. So this is pretty advanced stuff, and I'm happy that this works. Okay, I don't know if you can actually see what we achieved at this point, but it's pretty cool. we're able to create a board, we're able to dynamically add lists, and we can have cards in those lists, and we can update pretty much all the different titles and input fields around this. Now, the last thing that we want to implement is the real-time capability. And to make this a bit more interesting, we first of all want to invite other people. So to do this, let's go here back to the HTML, and before the closing main, I'm going to add another block to invite a user by email. This will just give us a nice little input here, and I think so far we don't even have a second user. So I should probably check this out in another place here. Okay, I'm going to use a different email, sign@devdactic.com. Send me a magic link. And now I need to be careful because I can't click on the link in the magic link. I need to copy the link and put it in here so it actually works and brings me in. Okay, this is a different user now who has no boards. So let's invite Mr. Simon to our own board. And maybe we're going to do this side by side to have a little glorious moment in here. That we got user 2. We don't need the logs anymore. We're not making any mistakes. So I'm hitting invite, which will hopefully create a new entry in the user boards table, which references this other user. So let's hit refresh, and we don't see an entry yet. This can have, of course, many reasons. First of all, do we actually have a user? Yeah, it's 8D something. And then we got no user in this one. So that means we pretty much or very certainly made a mistake somewhere along the way. If we click invite, add user is called, add user calls, add user to board. Maybe let's add a little snippet here to see. So it's a nice place. We didn't really encounter a lot of problems so far. So that's a nice way to show some debugging. The user to add, maybe it doesn't find the user, maybe the insertion is wrong. There could be different reasons why this fails. So let's take a look. I'm adding the email, I'm hitting invite. The user to add has an ID, so we are able to look the user up by the ID. And then we add the user, which seemed to not work, unless now I suddenly have an entry. That would be kind of strange. No, we don't have someone. I'm no signed in. Haven't I been signed in before? That's crazy. Okay, let me quickly take a look at this. Oh, I think I played myself. I shouldn't add single in here. I think this makes life more complicated, or actually it's okay, but in that case, I want to check if I have an ID instead, because looking at the data, this is what the data looks like. So let's give it another try. Invite the user to add, user boards, not allowed, new row violates row level policy for table user boards. In fact, I don't know what the row level policy is for user boards. User boards, insert, users can add their boards, true. Users can delete, users can view boards. That sounds interesting so far. The problem seems to be about adding their boards or the insertion. Yeah, most likely this again should be added with returning minimal. Again, in future, you most likely don't even experience this issue. So let's give it another try. User to add, no error, that looks good. And if we're lucky, please. Yes, there is the shopping list. User B in the house is able to join the shopping list. And we see a connection is made between our new user ID and the actual board number 4. Oh, that was nice. But it was also nice debugging. So you can always find a way. It's either about row level securities and understanding what's going on in the background. Yes, you need some kind of knowledge about this stuff to make this work, but I think this was a nice example. So we are now able to collaborate on the shopping list because Simon and Isaac out are both part of the shopping list. Now, what we want to do in this last part of the course here is to enable real-time functionalities. And to do so, we will first of all go to our database. We can do this with SQL as well, I think. It's actually that easy. So let's go to cards, edit the table, and enable real-time. Really, it's like when something is that easy, I have no reason to do it in any other way. And the same I'm going to do for lists as well. Enable real-time for lists as well. And then we should have real-time enabled for both cards and lists. We're not going to implement it for boards. That kind of works already nicely. So we're going to do it like this. In our example, we will now add a new function to the data service, first of all. And we're going to call this get table changes. Now, in future or in the next version of the Supabase SDK, we might have a slightly different setup because they're working on the presence feature, or probably it's already implemented now. And the real-time capabilities will also be in a different key. However, if you're using an older version, this is how it works. And I'm pretty sure in the future, it's going to be somewhat similar. So you're going to be able to make the transfer between how we do it in here and how it's done in the next version. So this function will let someone know about all the changes. Return changes as observable. This is just a setup that we pick in here, and this should work in a future version as well. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to say to or from the cards table, we want to listen using on, and we want to listen to all events using star. And then we get back a payload, which we can log out, or I'm just going to call changes next with that payload. And we're now duplicating this code for, guess what, the lists table. And this is a super easy way to catch all the updates from both tables and emit them in one stream. And now our board component simply needs to subscribe to this and handle this in some kind of way. So we already got this step here, handle real-time updates. There we're going to go ahead with this.data service, get table changes, and we're going to subscribe to all updates. And then I'm just going to put out a log update. Now, during my tries, I sometimes experienced issues with updates not coming through immediately or just after a few refreshes. We're gonna see if something goes wrong, but anyway, we're gonna get the logs in here. So let's see how we can make this side by side and see any kind of log. Maybe we also want to get rid of this authentication log. It's kind of boring at this point, isn't it? I'm gonna comment this out. And then we should have a nice clear log. Okay, let's try and add a new list. Okay, none of the user is getting the real-time update. That's great. It could have multiple reasons. For one, it could be that my project is once again not behaving as I expect it to be. And two, that I'm just made a mistake somewhere along the way. Most likely I need to check my settings quickly because it doesn't look like any real-time update is coming through at this point. No, or I also sometimes trick myself by not calling a function. So this is certainly also possible, but it looks like this time it's not that. So the problem definitely seems to be somewhat different. So yeah, we're calling get table changes, and I definitely should get the table changes if something happens, but I'm not yet. So let me take a look at this. Okay, I gotta confess something. I made one of the beginner mistakes, and I didn't understand the difference between a hot and a cold observable because this here returns an observable, but unless we actually call subscribe, nothing will happen. So we of course need to subscribe to all the changes we get from the database to actually call our changes next in here. So with that in place, we should hopefully get a log of update here. So let's check this out. I'm gonna go to the shopping list again. So we're both on the same, are we both on the same? Yeah, this is the one. So let's try and add a card. And on both sides, we immediately see the log update and the new event table cards. That's going to be interesting. And the new object. Also, if I update something, update this, we should get an update log. Again, table cards, new object containing all the information that we need. And now also when I delete a list, we should get a delete update. Actually, in fact, we're getting a delete update for a bunch of things because we got the cascade. So we're removing the pharmacy list and all of its cards. So cards, 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 and then we got table lists, event type, delete, and the old event. This is also why we added replica identity full in the beginning when we set up the SQL tables. So it in here returns the old document. This is really just one reason to use this. Okay, right now we're still not updating the view, so that is what we need to do in here. And I'm gonna bring in once again, or pretty much one final time, a bit of code. So what we need to do is, isn't it called update? Let's say update any, voila. First of all, we get the record. Either it's in new or it's in old. So that depends on the event type. If we don't have a record, we can also skip in here. And then we need to handle the changes for either updates to the cards table or to the lists table. And then we just need to dive into the different events. So on an insert, we push a record to the appearing list. In case of an update, we need to find which element was updated and set our array new. In case of a delete, we're gonna filter out the record and, well, insert, update, delete. That's pretty much everything that is to cover. And then, of course, we got the same stuff for lists. It's gonna be pretty much the same. Again, listening to insert and pushing something to lists. And also creating an empty object for the cards of that new list. We're gonna filter on update to replace the record and set it to our updated value. And in the end, filter out the list if it is deleted. So with all of this in place, let's see if we can make this work. I'm gonna close this because we don't see any logs anymore. Oh, nice. We got a new list. I'm gonna call this my dream list. I'm gonna save this and it is updated here. I'm gonna add, what do I actually add my dream list? Learn svelte appropriately. And it should appear here and I can add another card. Learn next because, well, could be nice to learn next. I'm gonna delete a card here and delete a card there. And we see everything is happening in perfect sync. So we have achieved the final result of this project. We're able to create boards, to invite users, to make it secure, and to finally use real-time functionalities, everything with Supabase. And we haven't even touched like Supabase storage or cloud functions. There's a whole lot more we could talk about in that direction. But I think this course, this tutorial is already pretty long enough for one session. That means we're done with the application and we can close the coding for today. Alright, and that's it for today. It has become really more like a massive course and not just a tutorial, but I still hope you enjoyed this full walkthrough of the Angular Trello clone tutorial with Supabase. We could learn a bunch of things, not just about SQL and about Supabase, but also about Angular observables and guards and all that kind of things that we used in this. And I think you can use a lot of this actually as like a template for your own application if you want to build something with Supabase. So just get rid of the board page or anything in the workspace, but then you can pretty much use this for your next side project without any problems. Just plug in your own Supabase instance and you're ready to go. Again, check out supabase.com. They've sponsored this video. Thank you for doing it. I really like Supabase and I will definitely continue using it. Anyway, by the way, this shirt, I think I got this like when Supabase was in alpha or something, so I've been kind of an early bird to Supabase. So maybe I should have purchased some stock. Yeah, well. Anyway, if you got any comments, leave them right below the video. And if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and stay subscribed so you get notified about all the upcoming videos in the future, where I will also show you how to build amazing mobile apps as a web developer. If you enjoyed it, check out supabase.com and I will catch you in the next one. And until then, as always, happy coding, Simon.